The view from my apartment window never ceases to captivate me. Standing tall above the bustling streets of New York City, the building offers a vantage point that most would envy. The expanse of glass reflects the city's endless energy, while inside my sanctuary the world feels quieter, calmer. I had built this life meticulously, thriving career, meaningful connections, and an independence I once thought impossible. But if I were honest, beneath the polished veneer, there's a void I've long chosen to ignore. Let me start at the beginning. My name is Nathaniel Hayes, and at 41 years old, I'm a successful software consultant and occasional speaker at industry conferences. People often describe me as confident, sharp, and even charismatic. I built my reputation from the ground up, and the victories are my badge of honor. But I've also learned to keep certain parts of myself hidden, particularly my past. Growing up in a small, tight-knit town in New Hampshire, I had what most would call a typical childhood. Church on Sundays, school on weekdays, and summers spent fishing with my dad at Lake Winnipesaukee. But as I reached my teenage years, questions began gnawing at me. I'd sit in the pew, listening to sermons that spoke of salvation and eternal life, and wonder, what does all of this really mean? To my young, restless mind, it felt like a security blanket, a comforting story for those too afraid to face reality. As soon as I left for college, I left those beliefs behind. Faith became something I'd outgrown, like a pair of shoes no longer my size. Now, decades later, I find myself living with the consequences of those decisions. My parents, still devout believers, tread carefully when talking to me about anything resembling religion. Their gentle attempts to reconnect me to faith are met with polite indifference. Truthfully, I love them too much to argue, but I've made my stance clear. I don't need religion. I have science, logic, and reason. Isn't that enough? On the social front, my circle of friends is eclectic but reliable. There's Mark, a fellow tech enthusiast who keeps me grounded, and Nina, whose creative spirit often challenges my analytical mind. We've shared countless late nights brainstorming ideas, solving imaginary crises, or simply laughing over a bottle of wine. Then there's Alex, the one person who's been with me through every storm and every celebration. Alex is not just my partner, but my anchor, a constant in the ever-shifting chaos of life. Our relationship, built on mutual respect and understanding, feels like home. But even with Alex, I avoid deeper conversations about life after death or the possibility of something greater. We laugh about it, saying things like, "If there's an afterlife, I hope it comes with decent Wi-Fi." It's the kind of humor that shields me from uncomfortable truths I'd rather not face. That Friday morning began like any other. I was preparing for a critical presentation for a client, a make-or-break moment for my growing consulting business. The apartment buzzed with the faint hum of my laptop and the aroma of freshly brewed coffee. Alex had left the night before for a weekend work trip to Chicago, leaving the apartment unusually quiet. A dull headache throbbed at my temples, but I brushed it off. Nothing a little caffeine couldn't fix, right? By noon, the pangs of hunger had become hard to ignore. I grabbed my coat and headed down to the gourmet food truck I frequented a few blocks away. Their Mediterranean bowls were my weakness, a perfect blend of spices, textures, and a generous heap of roasted vegetables. The air outside was crisp, the kind that hinted at the impending winter. Golden leaves crunched beneath my feet as I joined the modest lunchtime crowd. As I waited for my order, I found myself zoning out, my mind drifting to everything and nothing. The presentation, the weekend, the casual banter I'd share with Alex once they were back. Moments like these, simple and unassuming, always felt like the foundation of my life. When my name was called, I picked up my food and settled at a nearby table, the sun casting long shadows across the pavement. The first bite was as delicious as always, but then something changed. A metallic taste lingered on my tongue, a sharp contrast to the expected burst of flavor. I frowned but dismissed it. Maybe I'm imagining things, I thought. By the third bite, a strange sensation crept up my throat. At first, I chalked it up to the spices or maybe a sudden chill in the air, but the feeling escalated. My throat began to tighten, and my tongue felt swollen and foreign. Panic flickered at the edges of my mind as I struggled to take a deep breath. I dropped my fork, clutching at my throat as my vision began to blur. The bustling sounds of the city faded into a hollow hum. I fumbled for my phone, my fingers trembling uncontrollably. Before I could dial, the device slipped from my grasp, clattering onto the table. "Are you okay?" A woman's voice cut through the fog in my mind. She was seated a few tables away, her face etched with concern. I tried to respond, to wave her off or explain, but no words came. My body betrayed me as darkness crept in, narrowing my field of vision. The last thing I remembered was the cold, unyielding pavement beneath me as I slid off my chair. And then, nothing. When I came to, it wasn't like waking up after a restless night's sleep or even like coming out of anesthesia. No, it was as if my body had turned into a stranger to me. I could hear the faint beeping of machines somewhere nearby, each sound strangely echoing. It wasn't until I tried to open my eyes that I realized how heavy the weight of my existence had become. Slowly, painfully, I became aware of my surroundings. Cold tiles beneath me, voices crackling with urgency in the background, fragments of reality were stitching themselves together in my mind. But this wasn't the world I had left behind just moments, or was it hours, ago when I'd been sitting at that little metal table enjoying my Mediterranean bowl. That life already felt like a distant memory. "Can you hear me?" A woman's voice pierced through the haze. It took effort, immense effort, to even acknowledge the question with a subtle twitch of my fingers. Every movement felt as though I were fighting against gravity itself. And then, just as I was beginning to piece things together, there it was, an overwhelming silence. Not the kind of silence that brings peace, but one that carries an inexplicable weight, as if the universe itself were holding its breath. I wasn't sure when it started or how I recognized it, but I felt a change. An immense pulling sensation, one that seemed to defy everything I understood about life and physics, gripped my entire being. It wasn't my body, it wasn't even physical, but I was being dragged away from this pale echo of the world I once knew. And then, just like that, the pulling stopped. I found myself standing, or maybe existing, in a space that wasn't space at all. It was vast, empty, and cold in a way that made the hairs on the back of your neck stand on end. But the strangest part was the silence. It pressed against me from all sides, suffocating, relentless. I tried to speak, to call out for help, for anyone, but my voice didn't exist in this place. As I drifted, or perhaps stood still, time had lost all meaning here, I began to notice tiny flickers at the edge of the void, pinpricks of red light, faint and distant, like dying embers scattered across a vast expanse. Each one glowed brighter the longer I stared, and with them came a heat that seemed to grow closer, more oppressive. And then came the fall. It was so sudden, so absolute, that I had no time to resist or even react. One moment I was suspended in an unbearable stillness, and the next I was plummeting downward, faster and faster, with no ground in sight. The red lights expanded into fiery tendrils, dancing and writhing as if they were alive, each one pulling me closer. That's when the screaming began. It wasn't like anything I'd ever heard on Earth. It wasn't even sound, not in the way we understand it. It was deeper, raw, an energy that resonated through every fiber of my being. It wasn't coming from me, but it might as well have been. It spoke of pain, regret, anguish, and a chilling finality that made my stomach churn. Even now I struggle to put it into words. How do you describe a scream that feels alive, that wraps itself around you and doesn't let go? As the descent continued, shapes began to form in the growing red glow below. Jagged, chaotic landscapes stretched out as far as I could see, dotted with rivers of molten fire. and massive shadowy figures moving in the distance. I tried to stop myself, to slow my fall, but I was utterly powerless. This wasn't a dream. This wasn't some strange hallucination caused by lack of oxygen. This was real, and it was terrifying. But then, as quickly as it had begun, the fall came to an abrupt halt. My awareness jerked to a stop, and I found myself suspended over a vast fiery chasm. Below me, the shadowy figures moved with purpose, their forms too grotesque and twisted to fully comprehend. Each one exuded a malevolence so overwhelming that I felt it in the core of my being. Suddenly, one of them turned its gaze toward me. Its eyes burned with a searing intensity, glowing like hot coals, and I felt completely exposed. It didn't speak, but somehow I knew exactly what it wanted to say. "You don't belong here yet." Those words reverberated through me, echoing in the deepest parts of my consciousness. And then, as if to drive the message home, the figure extended one clawed hand toward me, and I felt an unimaginable force pulling me further down. Panic surged through me, raw, desperate panic. My mind screamed against the reality of what was happening, but there was nothing I could do. I was helpless, caught in the grip of something far greater than myself. And then, just as the fiery depths below began to swallow me whole, a piercing light erupted from somewhere above. It wasn't just a light, it was the light. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt warmth, not heat, but true, comforting warmth. The pulling sensation reversed, and I was no longer being dragged downward. Instead, I felt myself being lifted, carried upward, away from the chaos and torment. The fiery red glow faded into the distance, and with it the oppressive silence was replaced by the faintest whispers of a voice that carried with it a sense of peace, of understanding, and, most importantly, of hope. The last thing I remember before everything faded to black was that light, so brilliant and overwhelming that it seemed to fill every part of my being. I didn't want to leave it. I didn't want to return. But, as I would later learn, this was just the beginning. The moment I realized that I was no longer tethered to the world I knew was haunting. I couldn't tell you how long I drifted, or rather existed, in the void. Time, space, sensation, it all dissolved into something indeterminate. What lingered was a crushing awareness, one that felt alive in its silence. It wasn't peaceful silence, nor comforting. It was as if the absence of sound had mass, pressing against every corner of my consciousness. I don't know how to describe what I felt, because there was no body to feel anything. It was as though I had become an essence, a suspended awareness stripped of all physicality. My arms, legs, heartbeat, and breath, they were all gone, yet I remained. That realization alone was terrifying. I couldn't tell whether I was floating, standing, or falling. Direction had no meaning here. It was just emptiness. For the first time in my life, I had no control. Every analytical tool I had used to build my career, manage relationships, and navigate the world had failed me. The logic I'd relied on to dismiss the possibility of an afterlife didn't apply here. My reasoning felt foolish now, my arrogance juvenile. I began to understand painfully that I was somewhere beyond science, beyond reason, beyond life itself. And that realization terrified me. And then, amidst the crushing silence, came the pull. At first I wasn't sure what it was, a subtle sensation, perhaps just an impression, like being tugged forward gently yet deliberately. It grew steadily, becoming more insistent, until it demanded my full attention. That pull wasn't physical, but it dragged at my very existence in ways I couldn't understand, let alone resist. As the pull intensified, the stillness around me began to crack. Tiny pinpricks of light, red, angry, and distant, flickered at the edges of the void. They were faint at first, like the dying embers of a fire long extinguished. But as the pull grew stronger, those embers began to grow, glowing brighter, larger, more threatening. A deep, suffocating heat washed over me. It wasn't the kind of warmth you welcome in winter. It was oppressive, overwhelming, filled with menace. Then came the fall. It happened so abruptly that I barely had time to process it. The pull transformed into a downward plunge, fast and disorienting, as though gravity had gripped me despite my lack of a physical body. The fiery lights below expanded into tendrils of flame that lashed and writhed like living things. They reached for me, drawing closer with every passing moment. It was only then that I heard the screams. They weren't like the cries of anguish you'd hear in earthly life. No, these screams were visceral, primal, devoid of language or reason. They were raw sound, woven with pain and regret so profound that I felt it vibrating through me. Somehow I knew these screams weren't coming from me, but they could have been. Their energy wrapped around my awareness, pulling me deeper into the descending chaos. I wanted to shut it out, block it from my thoughts, but there was no escape. I was fully exposed. As the descent continued, shapes began to form in the glowing chaos below. At first they were indistinct, shadowy impressions flickering in the fiery light, but soon they took on horrifying clarity. Jagged landscapes stretched endlessly in every direction, their surfaces charred and scarred as though by a millennia of torment. Rivers of molten fire snaked through the land, their currents glowing with an unnatural brightness that promised nothing good. And then, the figures. I can barely write about what I saw next, because it defies every attempt at description. I saw beings, twisted, writhing figures in constant motion. Some resembled humans in agonizing detail, their limbs distorted, their faces frozen in expressions of unimaginable pain. Others were entirely alien, grotesque forms that made no sense yet filled me with visceral dread. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. I didn't have eyes to close. In the midst of this chaos, I felt something change. A presence emerged, vast and suffocating, impossible to ignore. My awareness turned toward it against my will, and what I saw filled me with a terror so profound that it felt like my very essence might shatter. The presence wasn't one being, but several. Shadowy entities larger than life, their edges blurred as though they existed outside the laws of reality. Their bodies shifted and twisted constantly, making it impossible to discern their true forms. But their eyes, their burning coal-like eyes locked onto me, searing through every layer of my being. And I knew without a doubt that these were demons. One of them stepped, or rather moved, closer, its motion fluid and purposeful. It didn't speak, but its gaze carried a message that reverberated through me like an earthquake. "You don't belong here yet." Those words echoed in the deepest parts of my consciousness, resonating with a finality that crushed any hope I might have had. And then it raised a clawed hand. That gesture alone unleashed a force so powerful that I felt myself being pulled deeper, faster, toward the fiery chasm below. Panic surged through me, raw and uncontrollable. I wanted to resist, to fight, to scream, but I was powerless. This wasn't a dream. It wasn't a hallucination. This was real, and I was utterly helpless. Just when I thought I'd be swallowed by the chaos entirely, the light came. It wasn't just any light. It was the light, brilliant, radiant, and overwhelming. It erupted from somewhere above me, cutting through the darkness like a sword. Its warmth wasn't oppressive, like the fiery heat below. It was comforting, like sunlight on a spring morning. The pulling sensation reversed abruptly, and I was no longer descending. Instead, I felt myself being lifted, carried upward by an unseen force that defied everything I had just experienced. The fiery chaos faded into the distance, along with the suffocating heat and screams. In their place came a soft, melodic whisper. I couldn't make out the words, but the sound filled me with peace. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt hope. The last thing I remember before everything faded to black was that light, its brilliance so pure, so all-encompassing that it seemed to fill every part of my being. And then, for what felt like the first time in eternity, there was silence. But this time it wasn't oppressive. It was restful. It was calm. This, I realized, was only the beginning. I wasn't prepared for what came next. After the warmth of the light above began to recede, an overwhelming pull gripped my existence once again, dragging me back downward toward the flickering fires I'd glimpsed earlier. The sensation wasn't physical, I had no body to resist, but it was potent, unyielding. If hope had been briefly kindled in the radiant glow of the light, the descent that followed smothered it utterly. I had thought I understood fear before, moments of panic in everyday life, the fleeting anxiety of deadlines, or the shadow of failure looming at the edge of ambition. But this wasn't human fear. It wasn't emotional, it was existential, a dread that burrowed into the very core of what I was, pulling apart the fabric of everything I thought I understood about existence. The temperature around me rose steadily, pressing against whatever form my consciousness had taken. It wasn't warm like sunlight or the heat of a roaring fireplace. It burned with malice, filling every space with its suffocating presence. Even the air, or whatever masqueraded as air in this place, carried the acrid stench of sulfur mixed with decay, like an eternal rot that seeped into everything. The red lights grew brighter as I plunged deeper, revealing jagged, chaotic landscapes below, like scars carved into the earth itself. But this wasn't earth. Whatever this place was, it defied explanation. Massive chasms stretched endlessly in every direction, their edges shimmering as molten rivers of fire snaked through them. The infernal glow reflected against the twisted rocks, creating shadows that seemed almost alive. And then I saw them. At first the figures were distant silhouettes against the fiery backdrop, moving in slow, agonized motions. As I descended closer, their horrifying details came into view. The shapes were twisted and grotesque. Bodies that had once been human but were now transformed into forms of unimaginable suffering. Limbs were elongated unnaturally, faces were frozen in expressions of despair, and skin looked like it had been burned, scarred, and torn apart repeatedly. These were no ordinary beings. These were souls, writhing in a torment they couldn't escape, their cries piercing even the suffocating atmosphere. The screaming, that awful screaming, grew louder. It wasn't sound in the conventional sense. It was raw, desperate energy that invaded my awareness. It spoke of pain, regret, and the irreversible finality of choices made in life. And worse still, I knew somehow that these weren't strangers. Some of the souls I saw bore fleeting hints of familiarity. People I'd passed on the street, colleagues from years ago, faces that had faded into the background of my busy life. And now, here they were, trapped in unending despair. As I continued falling, I became aware of another presence, something larger than the tormented souls that surrounded me. At first, it was only an impression, a shadow at the edge of perception. But as I moved deeper into the infernal realm, the presence solidified. Vast and suffocating, it radiated malevolence so absolute that I felt stripped of every defense I'd ever built to protect myself. The shapes moving through the chasms weren't like the souls. They were larger, darker, and infinitely more terrifying. The demons. The first one I saw stood at the edge of a fiery river, its enormous form obscured by shifting shadows that seemed to blur its true appearance. Its presence alone was oppressive, an overwhelming force that crushed against my awareness. Burning red eyes locked onto me, piercing through every layer of my being. I couldn't look away. I had no eyelids to shut or body to turn, but even if I did, it wouldn't have mattered. The demon's gaze held me in place, its unspoken message echoing through my thoughts. You are not here yet, but you will be. I tried to resist, to will myself away, but the pull only grew stronger. The demon extended one massive, claw-like hand, and with it came an unimaginable force that dragged me closer to the fiery depths below. Panic surged through me in waves, raw and uncontrollable. I wanted to scream, to beg for release, but no sound came. I was utterly helpless. As I descended further, more demons emerged from the shadows. Their forms shifted constantly, as if they couldn't decide on one shape. Some were grotesquely humanoid. Others resembled beasts from nightmares I'd never dared to imagine. Their movements were deliberate and terrifying, each step radiating malice. They towered above the writhing souls, their claws and whips slashing indiscriminately at those trapped below. The screams intensified with each stroke, blending into an unending cacophony of torment. One demon paused, turning its burning gaze directly toward me. Its voice, if it could be called that, wasn't sound but a vibration, deep, gravelly, and filled with disdain. "You think this isn't real," it said, its words resonating within my thoughts. "But you will learn. Oh, you will learn." And then it lunged. I wasn't ready for the force of its attack. Its clawed hand swiped toward me, not to harm, but to pull me closer. The sensation was unbearable, like being torn apart and stitched back together simultaneously. I was drawn downward, faster than I thought possible, into the heart of the infernal landscape. Around me, the fiery rivers churned, the jagged rocks glowed with molten energy, and the air buzzed with the screams of the damned. Just when I thought the torment would consume me entirely, I saw something I hadn't expected, figures I recognized. Among the writhing souls trapped in the chasms, I saw faces from my life. At first they were fleeting glimpses, an old colleague here, a childhood friend there. But then the faces grew closer and clearer, their expressions frozen in agony. One of them turned toward me, his form flickering between the man I once knew and a horrifying, charred version of himself. His mouth moved, shaping words I couldn't hear, but his eyes spoke volumes. They carried a regret so profound that it pierced through the suffocating despair surrounding us. "Nathaniel," his voice finally reached me, faint and distorted. "It's too late for us, but you can still—" The words cut off abruptly as one of the demons descended upon him, dragging his flickering form deeper into the fiery abyss. I wanted to help, to reach out and pull him back, but I couldn't. I had no hands, no voice, no way to resist the forces dragging me ever downward. And then, as the screams reached a crescendo, I felt something shift. A presence, a radiant, overwhelming presence, pierced through the chaos below. At first, it was only a flicker, a faint glow at the edge of my awareness, but it grew steadily, cutting through the darkness and overpowering the oppressive heat that surrounded me. This wasn't the fiery glow of the infernal realm. It was pure, brilliant light. The demons recoiled as the light washed over them, retreating into the shadows. The writhing souls paused in their torment, their screams fading into silence. And I felt myself being lifted, carried upward toward the source of the light. It was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. The warmth wasn't suffocating, it was comforting, enveloping me in a sense of peace I hadn't known existed. The fiery glow of the infernal chasms faded into the distance, replaced by the radiant brilliance of the light. And as I ascended, I heard a voice, not loud, not commanding, but steady and calm. "Do not be afraid." I thought I had seen everything. The hellish landscapes, the grotesque figures, and the fiery torment had pushed me beyond what I thought was the limit of fear. But I hadn't been prepared for what awaited me next. The darkness around me began to shift. The heavy, oppressive void seemed to lose some of its suffocating heat. Instead, a presence, vast, powerful, and incomprehensible, emerged in the distance. At first it was a faint glimmer of light, barely visible against the horizon, but it grew steadily, illuminating the dark expanse with a radiance that was neither harsh nor blinding, but all-encompassing. As the light approached, the demonic figures recoiled, their grotesque forms twisting and writhing as though the very presence of the light caused them pain. They retreated into the shadows, their fiery glow dimming until I was left in silence once more. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a flicker of hope. And then I saw it. The light wasn't just light. It was a being. No, it was more than that. It was a presence so overwhelming that it defied any earthly description. It carried with it a weight, a gravity, that pulled every part of my awareness toward it. At its center was a figure, human in shape but impossibly radiant, as if the very essence of life and truth emanated from it. The moment I perceived it, I knew who it was. I didn't need to ask or wonder. This was the source of everything I had tried so hard to deny. This was God, or rather his messenger, his emissary, the one I had always dismissed as myth and superstition. "Do not be afraid," the figure said. The voice was unlike anything I'd ever heard. It wasn't just sound, it was an experience. It reverberated through every part of my existence, calming the turmoil within me while simultaneously shaking me to my core. It was at once tender and authoritative, intimate and infinite. As the figure approached, my awareness seemed to shift. I no longer felt like a detached consciousness floating in a void. For the first time since I'd collapsed on that city sidewalk, I felt grounded, connected to something greater. The oppressive heat, the sulfuric stench, and the haunting screams of torment receded entirely. In their place was a warmth that filled me with an overwhelming sense of peace. "Nathaniel," the figure said, addressing me by name, "you have come far to reach this moment. I wanted to speak, to respond, but I couldn't find the words. How do you address the divine? How do you articulate thoughts in the presence of absolute truth?" My entire existence felt exposed, laid bare before this being. Every choice I had made, every thought I had harbored, every doubt I had nurtured. It was all visible, impossible to hide. And yet there was no condemnation in the figure's voice, only love, tempered with an unshakable sense of justice. "You have seen what lies beneath," the figure continued, gesturing toward the fiery realm I had just escaped. "You have glimpsed the consequences of a life lived apart from truth. But this is not where your journey ends." Before I could process these words, the scene around me began to shift again. The darkness faded entirely, replaced by a breathtaking expanse of light and color. It was unlike anything I had ever experienced, more vibrant, more alive than the natural world. The very air seemed to hum with energy and purpose. This new place wasn't just beautiful, it was perfect. Every detail, every particle, every element seemed to be in harmony with the whole. The ground beneath me wasn't ground at all, but a surface that shimmered with iridescent light. In the distance, I could see figures moving, glowing beings whose forms radiated a purity and joy that was almost tangible. I felt the presence of the figure beside me, guiding me forward without words. As I approached the radiant beings, I realized that some of their faces were familiar. They were people I had known, loved ones who had passed away, figures from my past who had always seemed lost to me. But here they were, whole and restored, their expressions filled with peace. One of them stepped forward, a man whose face I immediately recognized. It was my grandfather, the man who had once taught me to fish at Lake Winnipesaukee, whose gentle faith had always seemed quaint and outdated to me. His smile was warm, his eyes filled with a love that transcended anything I had ever known. "Nathaniel," he said, his voice carrying the same resonance as the figure of light, "it's good to see you." I wanted to embrace him, to apologize for dismissing everything he had stood for, but before I could move, he continued, "Your journey is not over. You've been given a glimpse of what awaits, both above and below, but the choice remains yours." "The choice?" I finally managed to ask, my voice trembling. It was the first time I had spoken since my journey began. "Yes," my grandfather said, his expression turning serious. "You must decide whether to return and change the path you've been walking or to continue as you are. The choice will determine everything." As he spoke, the radiant beings around us began to sing. not with voices, but with their very essence. Their song was a melody of love and truth, of redemption and forgiveness. It filled the air, resonating deep within me, stirring something I hadn't felt in decades: faith. Suddenly the scene shifted again. The light dimmed, and I found myself standing in the middle of a vast, barren plain. In the distance, I saw two paths diverging, one leading toward a radiant, glowing horizon, and the other descending back into the fiery chasm I had escaped. The figure of light appeared beside me once more. "This is your moment of choice, Nathaniel," it said. "You have seen the consequences of a life lived apart from truth. Now you must decide, will you return to the world and live according to the truth you have seen, or will you reject it and face the fate you have glimpsed?" I hesitated, the weight of the decision pressing down on me. To return would mean confronting everything I had once denied: faith, redemption, purpose. It would mean changing my life in ways I couldn't yet fully comprehend. But to reject this truth, I couldn't bear to imagine the alternative. "I want to return," I said finally, my voice steady despite the fear coursing through me. "I want to change." The figure nodded, its radiance intensifying. "Very well. But know this, the path will not be easy. You will face doubt, ridicule, and loss. But if you remain steadfast, you will find the peace and purpose you have been searching for." As the figure spoke, the barren plain faded away, replaced once more by the void. But this time the silence wasn't oppressive. It was peaceful, restful. I felt myself being pulled upward, carried by the same light that had lifted me from the fiery depths. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, it ended. When the light engulfed me, it wasn't like the flicker of hope I'd felt before. This was different. A tidal wave of warmth and brilliance that flooded every part of my awareness, washing away the oppressive darkness that had threatened to consume me. It felt like being reborn, though I was still unsure if I had a body, a voice, or any semblance of physical form. The light was alive, pulsating with energy that was both reassuring and overwhelming. For the first time, I felt a sense of peace so profound that it silenced every fear, every doubt. I wasn't alone. As the radiant light enveloped me, I became aware of other presences, intangible yet unmistakably real. They surrounded me like guardians, their essence flowing in harmony with the warmth of the light. I could sense their love, their acceptance, as though they were welcoming me home after a long, arduous journey. But their silence carried weight, a message that I would soon understand. The darkness below, the fiery torment, the suffocating heat, the piercing screams, all felt like a distant nightmare now. I was ascending, carried by the luminous energy toward a realm unlike anything I had imagined. For someone who had dismissed the idea of an afterlife, the realization of its reality was as exhilarating as it was terrifying. Then came the voice. At first it was faint, like a whisper carried on the wind. But as I ascended higher into the light, the voice grew clearer, more resonant. It wasn't just sound, it was truth, vibrating through every fiber of my existence. "Nathaniel," the voice said, addressing me directly, "do not be afraid." The voice was tender and comforting, yet authoritative, as though it carried the weight of the universe. I instinctively knew it was the voice of the divine, not just a deity, but the creator, the force behind everything I had ever dismissed or doubted. For the first time since this journey began, I felt compelled to respond, to speak, but the words didn't come. Instead, my thoughts seemed to radiate outward, absorbed by the light, as though it understood me without the need for language. "You have seen where your choices lead," the voice continued. "You have glimpsed the consequences of turning away from truth. But this is not your end, Nathaniel. You have been given a chance to see beyond the veil. I wanted to ask questions, to understand how I had come to be here, why I had been given this chance. But before I could formulate a thought, the scene around me began to shift. The radiant light, once all-encompassing, began to soften, revealing a world beyond my understanding. I stood, or rather existed, on the edge of a breathtaking expanse. It was a place of unparalleled beauty, so vibrant and perfect that it seemed to pulse with life itself. The ground beneath me shimmered with iridescent colors, and the air hummed with an energy that filled me with joy. In the distance, I could see figures moving gracefully, their forms radiant and whole. They weren't like the writhing, tormented souls I had seen in the fiery depths. These beings exuded peace and fulfillment, their very presence a testament to the glory of this realm. "This," the voice said, "is what I have prepared for those who love me." I felt a surge of emotion unlike anything I'd ever known. The beauty of this place was overwhelming, but it was more than just aesthetics. It was perfection, a harmony of existence that transcended anything I could have imagined. This wasn't merely a paradise, it was the culmination of every hope, every desire, every longing for meaning and connection. As I marveled at the wonder of this realm, I began to notice figures approaching me. They were familiar, yet transformed, their faces shining with joy and peace. Among them was a man whose presence stirred memories deep within me. It was my grandfather, the man who had once guided me through childhood summers, whose faith I had dismissed as outdated and irrelevant. "Nathaniel," he said, his voice resonating with the same divine energy as the light. "It's good to see you." I wanted to embrace him, to apologize for dismissing everything he had stood for. But before I could move, he continued, "Your journey is far from over. You have been shown glimpses of the truth, both above and below, but now you must make a choice." "A choice?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Yes," my grandfather said, his expression turning serious. "You must decide whether to return and change the path you have been walking, or to remain as you are. Your decision will shape not only your destiny, but the destinies of many." I wanted to stay. The peace and beauty of this place were irresistible, and the thought of returning to the struggles and uncertainties of life filled me with dread. But as I wrestled with the decision, the divine voice spoke again. "Nathaniel, you have been given this glimpse not for your own sake, but for the sake of those who will hear your story. Your return will not be easy. You will face doubt, ridicule, and loss. But if you remain steadfast, you will find purpose and peace beyond anything you have known." The scene shifted again, and I was shown visions, scenes of my life, moments I had long since forgotten. I saw the decisions that had led me here, the choices I had made, the opportunities I had squandered. Each memory was vivid, painful in its clarity, exposing the consequences of my actions not only for myself but for those around me. Then came the alternative, a vision of what my life could be if I chose to return and embrace the truth I had seen. I saw myself as a beacon of hope, sharing my story, guiding others away from the path of destruction and toward the light. I saw lives transformed, souls saved, and a purpose that transcended the fleeting comforts of earthly existence. The weight of the decision pressed upon me, but in my heart the answer was clear. "I want to return," I said, my voice steady despite the fear coursing through me. "I want to change." The voice responded with a warmth that filled me with reassurance. "Very well, but remember, Nathaniel, the path ahead will not be easy. You must walk it with courage and faith. And know this, you will not walk it alone." As the vision of the radiant realm began to fade, I felt the pull again, but this time it was upward, toward the light. The peace and joy of the divine presence remained with me, even as the boundaries of this realm dissolved and I was thrust back into the physical world. The first thing I felt was pain, sharp, unforgiving pain that jolted me back to the reality of my body. My chest burned, my throat was raw, and every breath came with effort. I heard voices, urgent and frantic, shouting commands. "We've got a pulse," one of them said. "He's back." I opened my eyes, the fluorescent lights of the hospital blurring into view. The faces of the paramedics hovered above me, their expressions a mix of relief and exhaustion. I wanted to speak, to tell them what I had seen, but my voice failed me. All I could do was squeeze the hand of the paramedic nearest to me, signaling that I was alive. But in that moment, I knew one thing for certain. I had been given a second chance. The first thing I became aware of was the aching weight of my own body. The light, the warmth, the divine presence, all of it was gone, replaced by the harsh realities of my hospital room. Machines beeped steadily in the background, and the muffled voices of nurses and doctors filtered through the door. My chest burned with every breath, a stark reminder that I had returned to a world that felt painfully raw and ordinary compared to where I had just been. But I couldn't shake the memory of what I had seen. The visions of both the infernal depths and the radiant realm above clung to me with an intensity that felt almost physical. Every detail, every scream, every flame, every burst of light was seared into my consciousness, impossible to dismiss or rationalize away. The realization hit me like a tidal wave. I had been given a choice. The divine figure, the radiant emissary who had guided me, had made it clear. My life, my decisions, my beliefs, they all carried a weight I had long denied. And now, standing at the crossroads of destiny, I had to decide which path to walk. The days that followed my return were a blur of medical tests, concerned visitors, and restless nights. Alex was by my side almost constantly, their face pale and drawn from worry. They hovered over me like a guardian, their love and care grounding me in a way that felt bittersweet. I hadn't yet found the courage to tell them what I had experienced. How could I? How could I put into words the unspeakable horror of the infernal realm or the indescribable beauty of the light? But I knew I couldn't avoid the conversation forever. Alex deserved to know the truth, even if it meant risking the relationship we had spent years building. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the hospital room was bathed in a soft golden glow, Alex turned to me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "You've been so quiet," they said, their voice tinged with concern. "I know you're still recovering, but something's different. I can feel it." "What happened, Nathaniel? Do you remember anything?" I hesitated, my mind racing as I tried to find the right words. How could I explain what I had seen without sounding delusional? How could I convey the depth of the truth I had encountered without pushing Alex away? But as I looked into their eyes, I realized there was no way to sugarcoat it. If I was going to share my story, I had to tell it with honesty and conviction. "I died," I said softly, my voice trembling, or at least I think I did. My heart stopped, Alex. For those 7 minutes, I wasn't here anymore. I was somewhere else. Their brow furrowed, confusion and worry flickering across their face. "What do you mean, somewhere else?" I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "I saw things, Alex. Things I can't explain. Things I never thought were real. I saw hell. And I saw heaven. And I saw God." The words hung in the air between us, heavy with implication. Alex stared at me, their expression a mixture of disbelief and something I couldn't quite identify. Fear, perhaps, or maybe something deeper. "Nathaniel," they said slowly, carefully, "you've been through a lot. Your brain was deprived of oxygen. It's not unusual to have strange experiences in situations like that. Near-death experiences are just hallucinations. Science has proven that." I shook my head, my conviction growing stronger with every word. "No, Alex, this wasn't a hallucination. It wasn't some figment of my imagination or my brain shutting down. It was real, more real than anything I've ever experienced. I felt it, I saw it, I lived it." They fell silent, their gaze searching mine for some kind of reassurance, some way to make sense of what I was saying. I could see the struggle in their eyes, the conflict between their love for me and their inability to accept what I was telling them. "What did you see?" they asked finally, their voice barely above a whisper. I closed my eyes, the memories flooding back in vivid detail. I saw a realm of torment, Alex, a place where every regret, every sin, every selfish act was laid bare. It was unbearable. The heat, the screams, the despair. It was like nothing I could have imagined. And I saw people there, people I knew, people who had turned away from the truth. Alex's face paled, their hands clutching the edge of the chair. And heaven? Did you see heaven too? Yes, I said, my voice softening. I saw heaven. It was everything. Light, love, peace, joy. Words don't do it justice. It was perfect, Alex. And I was shown what my life could be if I chose to change, if I chose to follow the path of truth. And what truth is that? They asked, their tone tinged with skepticism. That God is real, I said firmly, that heaven and hell are real, and that every choice we make in this life matters. Alex, I've lived my entire life denying these things, mocking the idea of faith. But I can't do that anymore. I've seen the truth, and I have to change. The room fell into a heavy silence, the weight of my words pressing down on us both. Alex looked away, their jaw tightening as they processed what I had said. I don't know if I can follow you down this path, they said finally, their voice barely audible. I know, I said, my heart breaking with the realization. But I can't ignore what I've seen, Alex. I can't go back to the way things were. I have to make a choice, and so do you. Tears welled in their eyes, and for a moment I thought they might walk away, that this would be the moment our relationship unraveled. But instead they reached for my hand, their grip firm and steady. I don't understand any of this, they said, their voice trembling. But I love you, Nathaniel, and I'm not ready to give up on us. If this is what you believe, then I'll try to understand. A wave of relief washed over me, though I knew this was just the beginning. The path ahead would be difficult, filled with doubt and struggle. But for the first time in my life, I felt a sense of purpose and direction. I had been given a second chance, and I wasn't going to waste it. The first thing I felt as I came back into the world was pain. It shot through my body like lightning, pulling me violently out of the peace of the light. My chest ached as though it had been pounded with a sledgehammer, and every breath was a struggle, my lungs clawing for air. I could hear faint voices around me, urgent and strained. "He's back! We've got a pulse!" someone said, the words cutting through the fog in my mind. The fluorescent lights above were harsh and unrelenting, a sharp contrast to the warm, embracing radiance I had just experienced. I blinked slowly, my eyes burning as they adjusted to the sterile environment of the hospital room. The voices around me began to take shape, accompanied by the steady beeping of a heart monitor and the metallic clink of medical equipment. "Sir, can you hear me? Squeeze my hand if you can hear me," a voice said from somewhere above me. I tried. I poured every ounce of strength into that one small movement, and to my surprise my fingers twitched. Relief washed over the paramedic holding my hand. "Good," she murmured. "You're going to be okay." But was I? Even as my body returned to life, my mind was caught between two worlds. The vivid images of what I had seen, hell, heaven, the divine presence, flooded my consciousness, refusing to fade like a forgotten dream. Every scream, every flame, every radiant burst of light remained seared into my memory, as real as the beeping monitors and the concerned faces surrounding me. I wasn't the same. I couldn't be. The hours that followed were a blur of activity. Nurses buzzed around me, adjusting IVs, checking vitals, murmuring reassurances I could barely register. My body ached in ways I didn't know were possible, a stark reminder of how close I had come to the edge. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the weight pressing down on my soul. Alex arrived not long after, their face pale and drawn, eyes rimmed with red. They rushed to my bedside, their usual calm demeanor replaced by a mix of fear and relief. "Nathaniel," they breathed, gripping my hand tightly, "you scared me half to death." Their presence was a balm, grounding me in a reality I struggled to reconcile with. "I'm sorry," I croaked, my throat raw from intubation. The words felt inadequate, but they were all I could manage. Alex shook their head, their grip on my hand tightening. Don't apologize. Just don't do that again, okay? Their laugh was shaky, edged with tears. I wanted to tell them everything. I wanted to pour out the truth of what I had experienced, the visions that had shattered my understanding of existence. But the words caught in my throat. How could I explain the inexplicable? How could I make them believe in something I had spent my entire life denying? The days that followed were filled with recovery, both physical and emotional. The doctors were astonished by my progress. Despite being clinically dead for over 7 minutes, there was no sign of brain damage or lasting complications. They called it a miracle, though they didn't dwell on the implications. For them, it was a medical anomaly. For me, it was confirmation of something far greater. But with recovery came questions. The memories of my experience were as clear as the hospital room around me, and they demanded answers. What was I supposed to do with this knowledge? How was I meant to reconcile the life I had built with the truth I had seen? Alex was by my side through it all, their presence a constant source of comfort. But even as we fell back into our familiar rhythms, a chasm had opened between us, one I wasn't sure how to bridge. The truth weighed heavily on me, and I knew it was only a matter of time before it spilled over. It happened one evening as we sat in the hospital room, the setting sun casting long shadows across the walls. Alex was scrolling through their phone, their brow furrowed in concentration. I watched them for a moment, my heart aching with the weight of what I needed to say. Alex, I began, my voice trembling. They looked up, their expression softening. What's on your mind? I need to tell you something, I said, the words coming slowly, each one heavy with significance. About what happened while I was gone. Their brow furrowed, concern flickering across their face. What do you mean? I took a deep breath, bracing myself. I saw things, Alex, things I can't explain. I wasn't just unconscious. I was somewhere else. Their expression shifted to one of confusion. What are you talking about? I saw hell, I said quietly, the words hanging in the air like a weight. And I saw heaven. And I saw God. Alex stared at me, their eyes wide with disbelief. Nathaniel, you've been through a traumatic experience. Your brain— No, I interrupted, my voice firm despite the trembling in my hands. This wasn't a hallucination. It wasn't my brain shutting down. It was real, Alex. More real than anything I've ever known. They fell silent, their gaze searching mine for any hint of doubt or insincerity. What did you see? They asked finally. I closed my eyes, the memories flooding back. I saw the consequences of my choices, Alex. I saw where I was headed, and it wasn't where I thought. And then I was given a chance, a choice, to change, to live differently. Their expression softened, a mixture of confusion and concern. And what does that mean for us? The question hung in the air, heavy with implication. I didn't have an answer, not yet. All I knew was that my life, our life, couldn't stay the same. As my physical recovery continued, the emotional and spiritual journey I had begun consumed me. I couldn't shake the urgency of what I had seen, the call to change and to share the truth with others. But where did I begin? How did I reconcile my newfound faith with the life I had built, the relationships I cherished? The first step was acknowledging the depth of the transformation I had undergone. I started with small acts, prayer, reflection, seeking guidance from spiritual texts. Each step felt like a leap into the unknown, but with every leap, I felt a sense of clarity and purpose I had never known. Sharing my story with others, however, was another challenge entirely. The skepticism I had once held was mirrored in the reactions of those around me. Friends dismissed my experience as a product of trauma, a hallucination born of oxygen deprivation. Our colleagues avoided the topic altogether, their discomfort palpable. And Alex, Alex listened, but the distance between us grew with each passing day. The turning point came during a quiet moment alone in the hospital chapel. The small, dimly lit room was a stark contrast to the radiant light I had seen during my journey, but it offered a sense of solace nonetheless. I knelt before the simple wooden altar, my heart heavy with doubt and fear. "God," I whispered, my voice trembling, "I don't know what to do. I don't know how to do this, but I know I can't go back to who I was." The answer didn't come in words or visions. It came in a sense of peace, a quiet assurance that I wasn't alone, that I was on the right path, even if it was one fraught with uncertainty. When I was finally discharged from the hospital, the world felt both familiar and foreign. The streets of New York, the bustling crowds, the towering buildings, they were the same, yet I saw them through new eyes. Every moment, every interaction felt charged with significance, a reminder of the second chance I had been given. But with that second chance came responsibility. The weight of what I had experienced couldn't be ignored, and I knew it was time to act. I began to share my story, not just with Alex, but with anyone who would listen. The reactions were mixed. Some were moved, others skeptical, but all I could do was speak the truth as I knew it. Alex struggled to understand, their love for me clashing with their disbelief in what I had experienced. It was a tension that would take time to resolve, but I held on to hope. Hope that the light I had seen would guide not only me but those I cared about toward a greater understanding. The road ahead was uncertain, filled with challenges I couldn't yet foresee, but one thing was clear: I had been given a second chance, not just to live, but to live with purpose, to walk a path of truth and faith, no matter how difficult it might be. And so I began. The world outside the hospital felt both foreign and familiar as I finally stepped into the crisp, early evening air. It had been weeks since I'd last felt the bite of autumn, or heard the city's distant hum. The streetlights flickered on as the sun dipped below the skyline, casting long shadows over the sidewalk. In any other circumstance, I would have been preoccupied with something trivial, a presentation, dinner plans, or the latest tech gadget I'd been meaning to buy. But now, everything felt different. The mundane had been eclipsed by a truth so vast, so all-encompassing, that it had shattered my old worldview. I wasn't the same person who had sat at that food cart weeks ago, savoring a Mediterranean bowl without a care in the world. That Nathaniel Hayes had been confident in his disbelief, comfortable in his skepticism. This Nathaniel Hayes, standing here now, alive when he shouldn't have been, was something entirely new. I had been given a second chance, a calling to embrace a truth I had once mocked, and with it came a responsibility I couldn't ignore. The first days after my release were filled with awkward attempts to navigate this new existence. My body had returned to the physical world, but my soul felt like it had been left in that radiant courtroom, standing before the divine. Everything reminded me of what I had seen: the warmth of the sunlight on my face, the laughter of children playing in the park, even the subtle curve of Alex's smile when they weren't aware I was watching. It was all so beautiful and fragile, and yet it all felt so fleeting. Alex, for their part, tread carefully around me. They had been my anchor through the recovery, but it was clear that I had changed in ways they couldn't fully understand. The unspoken distance between us was like a shadow over our shared moments. I hadn't yet told them the full story, about the hell I had seen, the demons, the warnings. But as each day passed, I knew the time would come when I couldn't keep it inside any longer. The truth wasn't mine to hoard. It was a light meant to be shared, even if it risked burning the ones I loved. It started with small steps. I spent hours in quiet reflection, revisiting memories of the light, the courtroom, and the divine presence that had addressed me by name. In the quiet solitude of my apartment, I found myself drawn to a Bible I had once relegated to the back of a bookshelf, a relic from my parents, given to me before I left for college. The leather cover was cracked, and the gilded edges of the pages had dulled over time, but its words felt alive in my hands. I opened it hesitantly, unsure of where to begin. It was the Gospel of John that first caught my attention. As I read, the words resonated with a clarity I'd never experienced before. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. Tears welled in my eyes as I realized how perfectly this described my own journey. The darkness I had faced, the suffocating torment, had not been the end. The light had found me, lifted me, and given me hope. I started to pray, awkwardly at first, fumbling over my thoughts like a child learning a new language. God, I would whisper, staring at the ceiling, I don't know what I'm doing, but I know you're there. Please show me how to live this new life. The turning point came during one of my restless nights. Unable to sleep, I found myself drawn to the balcony of my apartment, where the city stretched out before me in glittering chaos. The cool night air prickled my skin as I looked out over the skyline. It was there, in that quiet moment of reflection, that I felt the first stirrings of clarity. The memories of the courtroom echoed in my mind, along with the divine figure's words. You have seen where your choices lead. What will you do with this knowledge? The question was no longer rhetorical. It demanded action. I made the decision that night to stop hiding from my experience. The world deserved to know the truth, not just about what lay beyond this life, but about the love and hope that could change the course of a soul. I didn't know where to start or how to reach people, but I trusted that the path would reveal itself in time. The first person I shared my story with was Alex. It was a Sunday morning, over coffee at the small cafe we used to frequent when we first started dating. The conversation began innocently enough. Talk of work, weekend plans, the latest news, but I could feel the weight of my own silence pressing against my chest. Finally, I set my cup down and took a deep breath. There's something I need to tell you, I began, my voice steady but soft, about what happened to me when I died. Alex's eyes widened slightly, their expression a mix of curiosity and apprehension. I've been waiting for you to bring it up, they said, leaning forward. You've been different, Nathaniel. I mean, obviously. But this feels like more than just recovering from a close call. It is, I admitted. There's no easy way to explain this, Alex, but I saw things. Things that changed everything I thought I knew about life, death, and what comes after. I told them everything, the oppressive void, the fiery torment, the faces of regret and despair. I described the radiant courtroom, the presence of the divine, and the overwhelming truth that had been revealed to me. Alex listened intently, their expression shifting between disbelief, awe, and concern. When I finished, the silence that followed was deafening. So, what does this mean for you, for us? Alex asked finally, their voice barely above a whisper. It means I can't go back to who I was, I said. I've been given a second chance, Alex. A chance to live differently, to follow the truth I've seen. I don't know exactly what that looks like yet, but I know I can't do it alone. Their gaze softened, though the uncertainty in their eyes remained. Nathaniel, I don't know if I can believe what you're saying, but I believe you believe it. And I want to support you, even if I don't fully understand. It wasn't the response I had hoped for, but it was enough. For now, over the weeks and months that followed, I began to share my story more publicly. It started small, conversations with friends, colleagues, and neighbors. The reactions were mixed. Some were moved, others skeptical. A few dismissed me outright, their faces twisting in discomfort as they changed the subject. But for every rejection, there was someone who listened, someone who asked questions, someone who saw the glimmer of truth in my words. The more I spoke, the clearer my purpose became. This wasn't just about me or my experience. It was about the countless souls walking through life, unaware of the eternity that awaited them. I wasn't just a survivor. I was a witness, a messenger, entrusted with a story that could change lives. Eventually, my journey led me to a local community of faith, a small but vibrant church nestled in a quiet corner of the city. The people there welcomed me with open arms, their warmth and sincerity a stark contrast to the cold skepticism I had faced elsewhere. They encouraged me to share my story, to lean into the calling I felt so strongly. It was through this community that I found the courage to take my testimony beyond casual conversations. With their support, I began speaking at events, sharing my journey with larger audiences. Each time I stood before a crowd, the memories of the courtroom and the light guided my words. I spoke of the reality of hell, the promise of heaven, and the love of a God who offers redemption to all who seek it. As my voice grew louder, so did the resistance. Critics accused me of fabrication, delusion, or manipulation. Some mocked me, while others hurled insults that cut deep. But the truth I carried was a shield against their words. I knew what I had seen, and I knew what I had been called to do. Through it all, Alex remained by my side, their quiet support a beacon of stability in a world that often felt chaotic. Though they still struggled with their own doubts, their willingness to walk this path with me was a testament to the love we had built, a love that, I prayed, would one day lead them to the same truth I had found. Looking back on my journey, I see the tapestry of my life woven with threads I once thought were frayed and broken. Every choice, every struggle, every doubt had led me here, to a place of purpose, of hope, and of faith. The Nathaniel Hayes who had once scoffed at the idea of eternity was gone. In his place stood a man forever changed, forever grateful, and forever committed to sharing the light that had saved him.